Okay, we're recording. So if you looked, this class is a little bit different because, and I will tell you right now, there is a lot of material in this class. So do not wait till the very last day of the week to do your stuff. The first week is lighter than the other weeks, but I would suggest working ahead if I were you, because there are some weeks that are just going to be more brutal than others. There is a lot of material to be covered. So go out there and look at I tried to put everything out a little bit more in detail on that graphic visual calendar that I do for you guys. And then, oh, hold on one second. Just going to mute. My dad was very nice and brought me something to drink because my stomach has been very angry. Okay. So like I was saying, make sure that you go and look at the difference in this class. Unlike our other ones where there's just been one Cengage course or one piece of something that we go through, because this one covers different chunks of the Microsoft, the MCSA, there are technically 3 different Cengage courses, but there's chunks out of each course. So there's 70, 740, 70, 741, and 70, 742. If you go look on the documents, they're all split out. So it just says Cengage, like, and then it has the things after there. So I need you to go through all of those. Click on all 3 of those, so it'll populate you into the grade book for all 3 classes, please. And make sure that you look at those and look at the material. The weekly stuff is all broken out so that you can see it. And yeah, so please make sure that you check if you have questions right up front, because you can get behind really fast on this class. And instead of, there's not going to be any writing papers on this one because there's just so much we have to cover, because it's just all networking and server stuff. So yeah, it's not as much. There's just a bunch of topics that we have to cover. Oh, good Lord, cat, that's my arm you're attached to. Sorry, hold on. The cat decided that she needed to put a cloth through my arm. And a boy never learns. That's awesome. Apparently I needed Halloween decorations on my arm. So anyway, this one you can get behind on quickly. That really hurt. She managed to hook it through in 2 different places with the same cloth. So yeah, that's exactly it. I latch onto arm. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's make sure that if you have questions or problems that you ask me right away. So there's no papers, but there are some of the units that have a lot more labs than other units. The first week, there's not as much. So you kind of get to ease in, but the weeks after that, it kind of does this. So you'll have 1 week that's kind of light, and then the next week's harder, and then that, it goes back and forth. So make sure you look at all that first. And in just a second, I might make a funny face because, oh, that does not feel good. I'm going to clean that cat scratch out before it gets infected. Okay. All right. So are there any questions about what yeah, it's kind of a roller coaster of homework. All that stuff is in Cengage, but like I said, go look at I put all the, like I have been, the weekly expectations. So put all of that out and look through it. And if you have any questions, let me know. The other big difference is there is not a written final. It is going to be a hands-on practical final only. And that means it is worth significantly more. It's 30% of your grade instead of 20%. Yeah. So it will be would you stop the cat? I don't need you sticking stuff in me again. Thank you. I will give you lots of stuff. I'm trying to get you guys set up so you can do it on your own virtual machines. They link through the university rather than having to don't panic. I'm trying to make it easier for you guys than the one that I've seen that was used by previous instructors, because some of them I think they're a little bit too difficult on. So I will do that. And yeah, the last one I was not particularly fond of. So then when I looked at how this class was originally built out, I didn't like it. So I actually redid the whole class because they actually used the Microsoft rather than the Cengage. And while they're like, go look at your Cengage stuff. And I'm like, well, that's great, but you're lecturing from the Microsoft stuff and then telling them to use the Cengage stuff, and it didn't line up. And I didn't want to confuse the heck out of you guys. I still put the Microsoft official PowerPoints out there for extra material for you guys, because I know sometimes just looking at it reworded in a different way can help. And I've got some other materials I'm going to put out there just to make it a little bit easier. And I've got some cheat sheets and stuff I'm going to throw up. That sounded bad. I'm not going to throw them up. I'm going to post them so that you guys can see those. And then if there's anything that you guys run into that you're having a concept that's difficult before we get into that, I'd like to, before we get into the week 4, I'd like to run over anything that's causing any severe difficulty, so that you don't have any really difficult time with your hands-on final. Also, if you look, you guys get the fun of, you get a couple of weeks and then you get fall break, and then you get a couple more weeks. So let me go out and open up. Let me share my screen here. Okay. You guys see that okay? Yes, no, we're not answering. Yes, we can. Okay. Now, if you look under the syllabus and schedule, you'll see that big old, I tried to make it very obvious. We go through week 1, 2, 3, and then you have fall break, and then we have week 4, and then we have finals week. So it kind of throws our timing off, but at the same time, it also gives you a little bit of a breather with this class, because we have so much stuff that it kind of is a boon. So if you guys are having problems with stuff, you have a little bit of extra time to work on things. So yeah, and I also rearranged this a little bit so that you guys could see the weekly tests out there on the Mondays, and I didn't want it to be quite as confusing. So, and if you look, I actually put like MCSA 740, which units, 741, which units, 742, which units. So if you like take a look at this, it has how everything is broken out. Now this week, I might, because next week has got like 5 units in it technically, I might lead a little bit further ahead just to give us some more lead-in space so that you guys aren't like, ooh, next week. So I might pick up 741 unit 2 so that we can just at least start lecturing on it, but it will not be due until the due dates that are listed on here. Now, when you go into the assignment section, you'll see I tried to put which one and which units are in there, just like I have been for everything else. The one thing that is a little bit different right now, there are just placeholders for the tests because I'm in the middle of redoing some of them, because I did not like how I didn't like how arbitrary some of them were, and I'm not a fan of what do you call them, trick questions. So I didn't think that was particularly fair. So yeah, gray answers. I don't want them to be like, here's your question. Well, it could be any of these three answers technically, but I don't like questions and answers like that. I think that's a really good way to frustrate and anger your students. So that's why I'm redoing some of those. Okay, the next
Choose
thing
best
is,
answer just means that all answers are correct.
right, yeah, I don't want to have to put all of the above on every single question. So
I did have one question about
yeah.
you said that you were trying to put out like a way to practice for the final. Is there
Mhm.
any chance it would be out by like the Thanksgiving week so that way we could, I mean, just on the off chance, like I'm wondering, so that way we could
It
do it.
depends on how fast I can get, because I'm not in charge of the virtual, the VLANs and the virtual stuff is all done by someone else, and they recently implemented over the summer a new system. So that hopefully I can get in and get that done and set up before then, because I want to give you guys enough time. I would like to get it done this week, but it just depends on teacher availability and if I can get them to give me a hand with it, because I don't have access to all of it, because they were just like, well, you aren't using this, so we're going to shut it down. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm not using it right now, but so there's a
Fair enough.
couple
It
of
was
them.
just an idle thought.
No, but I would like to get them done for you guys, yes, before you go on fall break, so you guys can play around with it. I at least want to get it done so that you have, in the very least, week 4 and week 5, because I don't like doing with practical finals. I don't like giving you just the week of, because I like you guys to have a little more lead time on it. Now there is one other thing on the on the schedule. Tomorrow is Halloween, and it happens to be my favorite holiday. What I have done with my other classes is I've just done kind of like I do on Fridays when we have stuff, and because I know a lot of people, there have been people that have kids or families or things like that they want to go do stuff with on Halloween. And it's one of those holidays where you go out and do stuff at night. Kind of messes with you guys because your night class happens to be smack in the middle of it. So tomorrow night, I'm going to let you guys do whatever you want to do. I'll put some recordings out there for you guys to watch with material on them. And otherwise, just have a happy Halloween on that day. And I will have Zoom up for you guys to hop on like we usually do. And that way you can just hop on and off. And if you have questions, but it being Halloween, I fully expect you guys to take advantage of that if you want to. Okay. Now, before I start the lecture, is there any questions you guys have? No questions? Okay. All right, so I'm going to be doing the PowerPoint for Chapter 6 or Unit 6, which is the Hyper-V. These are kind of long, so I will warn you of that right now. And they're dense. So if you have questions, please stop me while we're doing it. Okay. So the very first one we're going to be doing, there's only 2 units we're doing on the 7740. The first one is the Chapter 6, which is the implementation of virtualization with Hyper-V. The nice thing about this class is, even though there's a lot of stuff we have to go over, you guys already did Windows Server. So there should be a lot of things that we're kind of re-going over. So hopefully this is just kind of like what we did with 131 and 248. It's like, here's the basics that you guys have already gone through. Here's the more advanced concepts. All right, so installing Hyper-V. So virtualization terms. There's the virtual machine, virtual environment that emulates the physical computers, hardware and BIOS. There's a guest OS, an operating system installed in a VM in the same way you install an operating system on a physical computer. A host computer, physical computer on which the VMs run. And then there's virtualization software, software for creating and managing VMs and creating the virtual environment in which a guest OS is installed. Now, we have gone over VMs a whole lot. So hypervisor creates and monitors the virtual hardware environment. We've talked about these before. There's the type 1 and type 2 hypervisors. A virtual disk consists of files on the host computer that represent a virtual machine's hard disk. Virtual network. This is network configuration created by virtualization software and used by VMs for physical and virtual network communication. A checkpoint is a partial copy of a VM made at a particular moment. All right. One thing I like about these slides is they do have a lot of really good visualizations. Okay, so in this one, you see you've got your host. I like to think bottom up when I'm going on these. So you have your host computer, then you have your Hyper-V hypervisor installed on it, and then you have your parent partition. You have Hyper Manager console with Windows, which is in Windows Server 2016. You have a child partition with your applications, guest OS, and your virtual machine 1, and then another child partition, which is set up the same way. System requirements to install and use Hyper-V. Now, when they're saying this, usually these are like the bare minimum, so keep that in mind. 1.4 gigahertz or faster, 64-bit CPU with virtualization extensions, a CPU that supports data execution prevention, DEP, and second level address translation, or SLAT. SLAT is called EPT on Intel processors and NPT on AMD processors. So if you're, depending on whether you have an Intel or an AMD processor and you want to know that for your particular system, you can go look those up for that. Virtualization support must be turned on in the BIOS. Enough free disk space to hold the operating system you're going to install as a VM, enough RAM to equal the minimum amount required for Windows Server 2016, plus the operating system to install on the VM. So that is why, also why when we're doing the hands-on, we're doing the Hyper-V so that you guys can use our licensing, because that can be a problem when you have to do it on your own. So this is what a Hyper-V manager looks like. And then you have, so you have your Hyper-V manager, and then there's an example of one of the machines, and you can see that down there. Installing the Hyper-V role and management tools. When you install Hyper-V role from Server Manager, that's great, Manager, you are prompted to install the management tools, which you should do if you'll be managing Hyper-V from the same server that's running Hyper-V. To install Hyper-V from PowerShell, there's a commandlet, and there's the script down there. If you will be managing Hyper-V remotely, you can install just the management tools on the management computer, and then there's the commandlet right there. And as usual, all the PowerPoints are already out there, so you guys can look at these and copy them. Managing Hyper-V remotely. You might want to consider managing the server remotely so that the management tasks are offloaded to another computer. You can enable remote management through Server Manager by clicking Local Server and then clicking Remote Management, or using the PowerShell commandlet, and that's listed right there. To remotely manage Hyper-V using PowerShell remoting must be enabled. By default, PowerShell remoting is enabled on Windows Server 2012 and later, but if it becomes disabled, there's the commandlet to re-enable it. Now, I will tell you that there have been some really interesting security holes with remote management of some of these, so please make sure that you have all of your patching done when you're doing this. Open a PowerShell prompt from the management computer and type this here, and that, or whatever name of the remote server is that you want to use. If both computers are in the same domain, you will not have to enter your credentials. If the remote server is not in a domain or in a different domain, use the commandlet that they have listed there, and you'll be prompted for the credentials to sign into the remote server. Hyper-V licensing. So Windows Server 2016 with Hyper-V includes licenses for virtual instances of Windows Server 2016 with the standard and data center editions. Standard edition includes 2 licenses for a virtual instance of Windows Server 2016. Data center edition includes licenses for an unlimited virtual instances of Windows Server 2016. Upgrading to Hyper-V on Windows Server 2016. If you have VMs from Hyper-V running on Windows Server 2012 or 2008, and if you're running a Windows Server 2008, what are you doing? You need to upgrade the VM configuration version to take advantage of new features in Windows Server 2016. VM configuration version can be seen in Hyper-V Manager by selecting the VM and looking at the bottom pane of the Summary tab. Configuration version for Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V is 8.0. If the version of the VM is less than that, you'll see the upgrade configuration option. To perform the upgrade, click Upgrade Configuration. In PowerShell, they have the commandlet listed there, and VM name is the name of your virtual machine. Okay, and here's your example of what that looks like. Creating virtual machines in Hyper-V. In Hyper-V Manager, all tasks related to creating and managing virtual machines are listed in the Actions pane. Hyper-V VMs consist of these files stored on the Hyper-V server, the configuration file, and the virtual hard disk files. In addition, you might also find the following type of files associated with the VM: differencing or checkpoint files, and then there's also saved state files. There's the process of creating a VM. Start the new virtual machine wizard in Hyper-V Manager. Give the new VM a descriptive name. Choose a location for the VM. Choose a Generation 1 or Generation 2 VM. Assign the amount of memory the VM requires. Configure networking. Create a virtual hard disk. Install the OS. Now I'm going to make a little caveat there when they talk about memory. Just like when I've talked to you guys about VirtualBox, when you're talking about memory, hard drive, and CPU, make sure that you account for all of the memory that you will need, because if you undercut it, you will have problems eventually. Basic virtual machine management with Hyper-V Manager. A running VM does not require using Hyper-V Manager. You do need Hyper-V Manager to configure and manage a VM's properties or access it locally. Connecting to a VM by using any of the following: right-click on the VM and click Connect, double-click the VM, select the VM and double-click its screenshot, select the VM and click Connect in the Actions menu. They really wanted to make sure that you had lots of different options to get in there. So here's an example of what that looks like. Virtual Machine Connection Console has the following toolbar icons. Control-Alt-Delete sends the keystroke to the VM. Start starts the VM. Turn off turns off the VM. Shut down sends a signal to the OS to perform a shutdown. Save saves the VM state. Pause pauses the VM. Reset resets the VM. Checkpoint, this creates a checkpoint of a VM. Revert reverts to a VM's already, the one above checkpoint you created. And enhanced session changes the session mode to enhanced. Some tasks you can perform with other menus. File, you can access the VM settings and exit the VM. Action, perform all the actions on the toolbar. Media, specify an ISO file options. Well, not an, all ISO file options. Clipboard, copy a screenshot of the VM to the clipboard. View, toggle the display of the toolbar. Help, get help on various topics related to the virtual machine connection console. Advanced VM creation methods. VMs can be created by using other methods besides new virtual machine wizard. You can import an exported VM, copying the virtual disk, converting a physical machine to a virtual machine. Exporting VMs. VMs can be exported and then imported to create one or more VMs. This feature allows you to back up a VM without shutting it down first. You can export a VM while it's running. After a VM is exported, it can be moved to an archival storage as a backup, imported on another server running Hyper-V, or imported on the same server. To export a VM using PowerShell, use the export VM name path, and then there's your path, commandlet replacing VM name, and see the path there with the name of the VM to export and the path where the files should be exported. Importing VMs. You can import a VM that hasn't been exported first. If your Hyper-V host suffers a hardware or software failure, you can move the hard disk containing VMs to another host and import them in place. 3 options for the type of import: register the virtual machine in place, restore the virtual machine, or copy the virtual machine. To import the VM using PowerShell, you'll see the VM, the import there, commandlet, and then import type is either register to register the VM in place, or copy to restore the VM and use the existing unique ID. Copying a virtual disk. The result of a copy is similar to an export-import, but the procedure is different. Copy the virtual hard disk from an existing VM to a new folder, or rename the copied file. Create a VM with the new virtual machine wizard, but in the Connect Virtual Hard Disk window, select Use an existing virtual hard disk option. The only real difference between this method and the export-import, method is that in this method, you must create the virtual machine and can change the VM name and configuration in the new virtual machine wizard. Converting a physical machine to a virtual machine. Hyper-V has no built-in tools to create a VM from a physical computer. Other tools available to do this, you can use the Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager, a free utility called Disk2VHD, which can be downloaded. This runs on the physical server and creates a virtual hard disk file from the disk on the physical server. Okay, so generation 1 and generation 2 VMs. When creating a new VM, you have the option of creating a generation 1 or a generation 2. Generation 2 VMs have enhanced capabilities and support for newer standards. They have UEFI firmware instead of the traditional BIOS. They have device support, network boot with IPv6 instead of just IPv4, VHDX only support, GPT boot, disk expansion, reduced a task surface, and they have secure boot options. Converting a generation 1 VM to a Gen 2 is possible, but you can't use a Gen 2 VM on Hyper-V versions before Windows Server 12 R2. Generation 2 VMs only support Windows 8 or Windows Server 2012 and later guest operating systems. Additional features you can use to manage and configure the virtual environment: virtual machine hardware settings, integration services, checkpoints, automatic start and stop actions, resource metering, enhanced session mode. Virtual machine hardware settings. So BIOS and firmware settings. The BIOS settings for generation 1 VM enables you to change the order in which the VM's BIOS searches for boot devices. Click a device in the startup order list box and click the up or down arrows to change its order. It's just like when you're using a normal BIOS. On Gen 2 VMs, the hardware category is firmware instead of BIOS. You can enable the secure boot feature and set your boot order. So this is an example of what that looks like. And on the right, you'll see your CD, IDE, legacy, and all that stuff that you would see similar to a BIOS. And then on the Gen 2, this is what they were talking about. You have Are you booting from a file, a DVD drive, network adapter, etc.? Security. In the security settings of the VM, you can enable or disable the secure boot. This is only your Gen 2 VMs, and you can enable encryption support.
So I just have a thought that you might like for the next time you have your next class coming through this section.
Mhm.
Since you already have the virtual machines that you're trying to get set up for us coded and everything, you can literally have them following along on a virtual machine as you're going through this
Right.
with them.
Yeah, that's what we had intended to do, but they changed over all of our stuff and our licensing over the summer. So all of the stuff that we had basically got flushed down the toilet. So it was like, yay, boo, yay, you know. So there's some good things about it because it's supposed to be easier for you guys to use, but we basically have to recreate everything from scratch. So this is your settings looks like there. Memory allocation. When you create a VM, you can configure the amount of memory it's allocated to the host computer. You can change the amount at any time later. The amount of money you allocate, I think they meant memory. You allocate must take into account other VMs running simultaneously and enough memory left over for the host server. That's funny. Windows Server 2016 running Hyper-V needs about 800 megabytes of RAM plus 32 for each running VM that has been assigned up to 1 gig of RAM. So be aware of how many are you going to use so that you have, I usually like to create a little bit of padding so that if I'm like, oh, I want to add extra there, because it always seems like you end up needing more room than you have. Dynamic memory. Okay, so there's static and dynamic memory. Dynamic memory is a Hyper-V feature that allows an administrator to set up minimum and maximum memory allocations for each VM. Hyper-V adjusts the memory allocation for a VM up or down based on its actual memory needs between the minimum and maximum value you specify. Dynamic memory isn't enabled by default. Remember that. It is not enabled by default. You enable it by choosing memory in the VM settings. So you can see here, you have your memory, and then if you look down, you see dynamic memory, and then you can see the options there. Hot add memory. Hot add and remove memory, the addition of memory or removal of memory while the VM is running. This feature is supported only on VMs running Windows 10 or Server 2016 guest operating systems and some distributions of Linux. The VM configuration version must be version 8 or higher, so VMs created in earlier versions of Hyper-V will not support this feature until you upgrade your configuration. Smart paging, a Hyper-V feature that uses a file on the host computer for temporary memory storage when a sudden surge in memory requirements exceed the physical amount of memory availability. Works in dynamic memory. No configuration is needed for smart paging other than its location on the host, and then they give you an example of the path for that location. Can you hear the cat? Is she meowing like crazy? Oh, you're talking about people being catty. I gotcha. People, not the actual cat. Can you actually hear her, Nick? Yeah, she actually walked past the computer. I guess she decided I'm going to meow over here, and then she had to walk past the computer to meow a little bit. So she just had to share a little bit with you guys. Virtual processor settings. Virtual processor, the representation of a physical processor or processor core residing on the host that can be assigned to a virtual machine. You can adjust how many virtual processors are assigned to the VM up to the total number of physical processors or processor cores installed on your host computer. The resource control section specifies how host resources are allocated to the VM. And you can see here, you have one virtual processor, and then you have all the settings right there. Integration services. Integration services provides enhanced drivers for the guest OS and improves performance and functionality for IDE and SCSI storage devices, network interfaces, mouse, and video devices. Storage controller and network interface drivers included in integration services are called synthetic drivers. Emulated drivers, referred to as legacy drivers, are used when integration services is not installed. And you can see here integration services, and then you have a bunch of the options there. It offers additional services like operating system shutdown, time sync, data exchange, heartbeat, backup, which is your volume checkpoint, and guest services. Checkpoints. Checkpoints can be used to revert a VM to a previous state. Starting with Windows Server 2016, Hyper-V now has two types of checkpoints. You have a standard checkpoint, original type of checkpoint that captures the state of a virtual machine, including the running state. Standard checkpoints should only be used in development and testing, not on production VMs. Production checkpoint, supported for production virtual machines and uses backup technology in the guest OS to create the checkpoint. Production checkpoints do not save the running state of a virtual machine, but they can be created while the VM is running. So make sure you know the difference between your checkpoints. Managing checkpoints, you can create up to 50 checkpoints per VM. Be aware checkpoints do take up space. When you create a checkpoint, either 2 or 3 files are created: config file, automatic virtual hard disk, and a saved state file. Be aware of some issues with checkpoint storage. They take more storage than you realize they do. So my suggestion is that you look at it first, do your checkpoint, and then look at it again, just so you're aware. They are stored on the host system volume by default, so you might want to relocate the folder to a different disk. After a checkpoint's created for a VM, you can't change the checkpoint location for that VM. So make sure that you figure out where you want to put it first. You should always use Hyper-V Manager to delete checkpoints. Don't manually delete them. It's kind of like using regedit to go in and cut things up. If you don't know what you're doing, you can really mess things up. Be aware of some issues with checkpoint. If you create a standard checkpoint while a VM is running, the amount of space required for the checkpoint includes the amount of memory allocated to the VM. Checkpoints decrease a VM's disk performance. Checkpoints must be deleted before expanding a disk. Checkpoints can't be used with pass-through or differencing disks. So when I worked with our network engineer, he frequently checked the status of our checkpoints so that we didn't have too many of them, because they did cause some serious performance issues. Reverting to and applying checkpoints. 2 ways to use a saved checkpoint. You can revert, return to the VM to its state when the most recent checkpoint was taken, and apply allows you to select the checkpoint to apply. And here's your example of what they look like. Automatic start and stop actions. Use automatic start and stop actions to specify how a VM should behave when the host computer starts and shuts down. Options for automatic start actions: nothing. Automatically start if it was running when the service stopped. Always start this virtual machine automatically, or you can create a startup delay. Options for automatic stop: save virtual machine state, turn off virtual machine, shut down guest operating system. So here's your example of your automatic start and the little options there, and your automatic stop. Resource metering, a Hyper-V feature that allows vendors of large-scale virtualization to measure customer use of VM resources. And of course, it's for billing purposes. The following can be measured: your average CPU usage, incoming and outgoing network traffic per network adapter, minimum, maximum, and average physical memory use, maximum disk space allocated. Apparently we have 2 singers today. To enable resource metering, enter the following command at the PowerShell prompt on the Hyper-V host, and you can see that down there. To target specific metrics, create a resource pool for one or more metrics, and then enable resource metering for that particular resource pool. You can create resource pools for the following: memory, processor, Ethernet, VHD, ISO, VFD, fiber channel, port. To create a resource pool named memory pool to measure memory, use the following command at a PowerShell prompt, and you can see that down there. Next, you need to configure a VM to use that resource pool. The following command tells the server VM1 to begin using resource pool memory pool to measure memory use. VM must be shut down before entering this command. Now, there are a lot of those caveats when you're dealing with these PowerShell ones, so make sure to check that it's not something that you don't have to shut it down first before you do it, because sometimes if you don't shut them down, these don't work correctly. Yeah, that's, hi Dot. Meep is the one that usually is serenading us, and Dot is, Meep's actually very polite. Dot is the smallest and the loudest cat I have.
So quick question on the PowerShell commands.
Yep.
You said if you use them, they just don't work, but do they ever like just work the virtual machine, or is it just them not working?
It depends on which one you're doing. I have seen them partially work and completely mess up your settings, depending on what you're doing. So I'm pretty paranoid when I use them. I make sure to check everything before I hit enter. And I always save state before I use PowerShell. Those are my 2 caveats on there. Save before you are going to do major changes with PowerShell. And then just like when you're doing peer review or things like that, read everything first.
Fair enough. That was the main reason I was wondering, is because if it was just that they wouldn't work, I wouldn't really care. But if they had a chance of messing everything up, then yeah, save state.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty spectacular corruption, not like a complete corruption you can't come back from, but if you didn't save within the last 2 hours, you have to roll back and do everything over again type stuff. So make sure that you consistently use your save states when you're doing them. Enhanced session mode. Enhanced session mode is a feature that improves interaction and device redirection between host computer and VM connection console. Enhanced session offers audio redirection, printer redirection, USB devices and smart cards, drives, some plug and play devices, not all of them, display configuration, copy and paste of clipboard data files and folders. So this is an example of what that looks like. Enabling enhanced session mode. To use enhanced session mode, you must enable it in Hyper-V Manager and on the guest operating system. Verify the following. Remote desktop services must be running on the guest OS. You must log on to the guest OS with an account that's a member of the local administrators or remote desktop users group. To enable enhanced session mode using PowerShell, you have that commandlet there, and you have to use it on your Hyper-V host. And here's your example of what that looks like. Non-uniform memory access, NUMA, a system memory architecture used in multiprocessor systems that allows processors to more efficiently share memory. NUMA divides the memory and processors into groups called NUMA nodes. Try and say that one a whole bunch, NUMA nodes. Memory in the same node as the processor is local memory, and memory in a different node is remote memory. An operating system that supports NUMA attempts to run processes and applications using a processor and memory that are located in the same node. So those processes have faster access to their allocated memory. NUMA spanning, if more memory is needed than can be allocated from a single NUMA node, additional memory is allocated from another NUMA node. I'm kind of nematodes. I'm going to think of that whenever I think of it now. Oh, that's good. Configuring NUMA. NUMA spanning is enabled by default in Hyper-V, but you can disable it if you want to. Click Hyper-V setting and click NUMA spanning, and you can see that it has that option to disable there. And then you can see this is what your NUMA configuration pane looks like. Delegation of VM management. Users who are administrators of the Hyper-V host computer or our domain administrators have full access to Hyper-V Manager, Hyper-V settings, and VMs. If you want a user or group of users to have permission in Hyper-V to perform only specific tasks, you can fine-tune permissions using Authorization Manager. Authorization Manager is a management console. You start by typing, and then you have that there from a run dialog box or from the search feature on the taskbar. Then you can see there. And then that's your section here. And this is where you go in for assign user groups. And then you can do it from Active Directory or Authorization Manager. Discretionary device assignment, DDA. A new feature in Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V that gives users the ability to give a VM exclusive access to hardware devices on the host computer. With DDA, the VM has direct access to the device, bypassing the Hyper-V hypervisor, which increases performance. The details of using DDA are beyond the scope of this book, but the basic steps are as follows. Disable the device on the host computer using the device manager or the disable PNP device commandlet. Dismount the device from the host computer using dismount, that's the commandlet there, and attach the device with that commandlet there for add. Managing VMs with PowerShell Direct. PowerShell Direct allows management of a running Hyper-V VM from a Hyper-V host PowerShell prompt. Previously, a VM and host computer had to have a working network connection and a valid remote management setting in order to perform management of the VM from the host. Use the, and then there's a reason I don't spell all those out because it gets a little confusing, but use that commandlet there and provide proper credentials for the VM. From there, all commandlets you type in PowerShell are executed on the virtual machine. To exit the host PowerShell session, type exit and then PS for PowerShell session. Okay. Looks like we just had a whole bunch of graphics on that one, so it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. All right. Now, before I hit stop, are there any questions for today, or are you just going to go sit in the corner and cry? Brain hurt? I will guarantee, even looking at this class and putting it together, my brain hurt. Take time. And one of the best things that I have ever learned is sometimes going to sleep and waking up the next day is enough to help you process. So you guys go have your dinner, go look through stuff, make sure you look through, like I said, make sure you look through the syllabus and everything so you have a feel for the class tonight, okay? And tomorrow, no live lecture, there'll be videos. So go enjoy yourself for Halloween, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good night.